Joining us now is the co-CEO of the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, Alex Rivchin, who himself also appears in this documentary and is also the author of The 7 Deadly Myths, Anti-Semitism from the Time of Christ to Kanye West. Alex, great to have you back on Outsiders. Hope you are well.
Thank you,
Tell us a bit about your role in the documentary. But before we do that, I got to get your comments on the graffiti at the Mount Scopus School in Melbourne last night. Jew die was the words put up there.
Well, it's a horrific thing, you know, to see members of the Jewish community have to drive past that, students that go to the school, parents that send their children there, a place where their children they believe are safe, and to know that someone went there and daubed the words Jew die on the walls of that school. It's an awful thing. People will dismiss it as mere graffiti, but it's not. It's a threat conveyed very publicly, very graphically, very vividly to the Jewish community. And it's the latest in what we've seen for 7 or 8 months now. On a daily basis, assaults, intimidation, harassment, attacks on the Jewish community, on our right to live in this country freely and peacefully as Jews and as Australians.
James.
Alex, I want to ask you, what do you think about the way the Prime Minister and the government has been responding to this tidal wave of horrific anti-Semitism, particularly around the way it seems very often the Prime Minister, when he talks about anti-Semitism, he has to caveat it by saying, and all other sorts of forms of discrimination, and the way in which he, unlike other leaders such as Joe Biden even, have come out against the ICC, the criminal court, and its move to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu. Do you think that there's a weakness at the top here that is creating a vacuum where these sorts of things can occur?
I think the Prime Minister's response has been inadequate from the beginning. And from my dealings with the Prime Minister over the years, and also with the Foreign Minister and members of the Cabinet, I don't believe that they enjoy seeing this surge in anti-Semitism in our country. I know they're concerned about it. But there's a difference between expressing certain views privately, expressing solidarity with the community, and acting publicly. These are our national leaders. These people have been elected to lead on critical issues. And when we have a crisis of anti-Semitism in this country, where one segment of our population is under threat, their livelihoods, their security, their future in this country, it requires bold, outspoken, determined leadership. We've seen it from the Premier in New South Wales, Chris Minns, who's been exemplary, but at the federal level, whether it be the Education Minister being sluggish, flat-footed and ambivalent when it comes to what's happening on our campuses, the Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister, they haven't done enough.
Rita.
Well, this crisis in anti-Semitism, do you acknowledge that this is predominantly, if almost not all completely, a far-left issue, that this is something that is not both sides of politics, because that's something that's said often? Of course, there are people on the far right who may also be anti-Semitic, but they don't have institutional power. We're not talking about academia, corporations, the celebrity activist class. What we're seeing in this country and elsewhere in the West seems to be, well, it is very much a leftist movement.
At the political level, I agree with you entirely, Rita. And the standard bearers, the supposed great defenders and advocates against racism around the world, tend to be of the left. And the reality is that they don't care about Jews. In their construction and their understanding of racism, they view it as something inflicted by the privileged and the powerful on the weak. And they view the Jews as being uniformly white, wealthy, powerful, and these are things associated with perpetrators rather than victims. So they are unable and unwilling to see the Jews as being victims of this surge in racism in our society. But in terms of, you know, at a grassroots level, the actual perpetrators of anti-Semitism, a lot of it, as we see on the university campuses, is coming from the left, absolutely no doubt. But we're also seeing the far right realise that this is an anti-Semitic moment in the world and in our country, and they're stepping into the breach. There's an opportunity there because there's been that absence of leadership. There has been that failure from the very top to denounce this hatred that is taking control of our society. And every malevolent actor, from religious extremists to the far right to the far left, will therefore embrace this anti-Semitic opportunity. But again, you know, to your question, at a political level, the further left we tend to go, the worse the actions on anti-Semitism have been. The Greens have been shockingly appalling in what they've done. When you see state members of their parliament talking about Jews, they don't even hide it in words about Zionism anymore. They talk openly about Jews and their tentacles reaching in and controlling aspects of society. All of the conspiracy theories, all of the myths that have pervaded for centuries are now common speak for the far left. Jews and money, Jews and power, Zionist lobby, disloyalty, all of these things are now everywhere. And those on the far left, in the human rights community supposedly, who believe that they stand against racism, they need to have a very good look at themselves.
But Alex, it's not only the far left, I would argue, it's the broader left in general. We have seen pretty much the Federal Labor Party you mentioned. We've had a group of Jewish women who've come out begging Penny Wong to actually say something about that horrific video of the young Jewish girls. We won't go into it or show it. It's too disturbing. A group of Jewish women in Australia have said, why isn't Penny Wong speaking out about that? We've had the recent vote at the United Nations. We've had activity after activity where Labor seems to kind of be saying, well, you know, we're not 100% behind Israel at all. And I think that gives license, doesn't it? If you don't have strong leadership at the top of the government, the federal government, that's a license to people beneath who are anti-Semitic to go, right, I'm going to have my moment now.
I agree with you entirely. And, you know, as you mentioned with Australia's votes at the United Nations in support of Palestinian statehood, in support of a Palestinian state 7 months after the army of the Palestinian state in Gaza inflicted the most grotesque, brutal, inhuman horrors on a people that we've seen since the Holocaust era, to even be talking about creating a Palestinian state in this time, it's scandalous. So it shows that the government is capable of acting decisively and boldly when they want to, but unfortunately it's in the wrong direction. And again, I agree with the sentiment, Rowan. When you have leaders who have influence and power and status, like Penny Wong, not doing enough, being too ambivalent, always seeking to equate Islamophobia with anti-Semitism when the two have nothing to do with each other, it does signal to those throughout civil society and the grassroots that this is okay, that anti-Semitism is a permitted, tolerable form of hatred.
And I'd add to that, Alex, and I'd love your thoughts, Anthony Albanese refusing to condemn the ICC, the International Criminal Court, from seeking arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and comparing the government, the democratically elected government of Israel, with the Hamas butchers, rapists and murderers in the one breath. And Anthony Albanese had no words to say about it.
It shouldn't be difficult for a Prime Minister to condemn what's just happened at the ICC when you've got this rogue prosecutor in the same breath seeking arrest warrants for the butchers of Gaza, who are now underground, surrounded by hostages held in all violation of humanity and international law, who just inflicted the horrors of October 7, and they're equated with the democratically elected leaders of the state that is fighting these terrorists. It should not be difficult to condemn this, and also to see the national interest from an Australian point of view to denounce this sort of an encroachment. The ICC was formed to go after despots and tyrants in failed states, not with countries that are liberal democracies with independent judiciaries capable of taking action against their own citizens. And if Israel's threatened in this way, then Australia could be in the future when we're called upon to fight terrorism as well. So the fact that, you know, the United States have denounced this firmly, they've spoken about the need to impose sanctions against the ICC to restrain it. But in Australia here, we've had virtually nothing uttered about it. It's thoroughly disappointing.
Alex Rivkin, always great to chat to you. Thanks for coming back on Outsiders.